Okay, and welcome to the tutorial about how to use Skyrigger to rig up your models. This is a random mesh that I have. First thing you want to do is bring up your outliner, make sure that you have all the meshes you're going to be rigging. And in this case, I've actually got this character up in parts. And when I go and talk to the game designer, they can say things like, no, he's not going to be using the headset at all. He's not going to be using the beer bottle because this is a family game. So you can just delete that. So you do. And they said that little tiny weird plane there, that's just an artifact. Get rid of that. And low, we don't know what that is, but it should be pretty much combined with leg. There's no reason for it to be separate. So under modeling, you can come in for mesh and just combine them. It makes history in Maya, and then you go to edit, delete all by type history to get rid of that. Watch what happens in the outliner when I do this. It basically just reduces it down to a mesh, and you can rename the mesh. Now this board is something that may be used by the character later, but it's going to be a special rig, and you clarify that. So just for the purposes of this tutorial of using Skyrigger to rig up a bipedal character, we're just going to stick with the basic mesh of this skater character. By the way, if your mesh has come in but your texture has not, you may want to go in here to the rendering editors and pop down to hypershade, and when it comes up you need to find out which shader this character is using. You can use it by clicking on the character and select under hypershade edit, select materials from objects, and that means it's going to select the shader that this character is using. You can see here that this Lambert shader has, I'll increase the size here, you can see it better. It's utilizing this shader. It's got a little yellow frame around it, so we know it's using that, and I'm able to follow it down to its color. If you see black here, it means that while it may have a shader, it currently cannot read the texture for that particular character, and you want to kind of follow this down its own rabbit hole by clicking on the folder icon and then making sure that it's pointing to the correct folder, and it is in this case. So if your meshes come in that are dark and you need to make sure that they've got the right shaders and textures on them, please take care of that first. Second thing we like to do is make sure that the settings are good. So you can go here to the little icon in the lower right of this guy running away from the gear sun. Another way of doing this is coming up to Windows and then go down to Settings, Preferences, and then go to Preferences. It'll bring this up, same thing. On the left column, go to Settings, make sure that we are using feet for now, not centimeters, and 30 frames per second. You can save that, then come up to Display Grid, click on that, and make sure that you have the numbers 10, 1, 1, apply. So now I know that every single square in here is 1 foot. The world is in feet, but I have just made sure that the grid also reflects that each one of these squares is now 1 foot. So when I go to the orthographic views, I can try and verify that the character is a 5 foot tall person. Now we're not getting the grid in here because of something called the clipping plane, but you can go into any of these views that are giving you a problem with the clipping plane. It looks like the character is kind of half immersed in invisible milk. And view, select camera, and then go view to camera attribute editor. Let me show you where that lives on the menu. View, select camera, and then view camera attribute editor, and this will come up. I cover this in the other tutorials. It's really crucial, and people get kind of flummoxed about it all the time. So you can actually put the clipping plane at 1 and then 10,000, and basically it's drawing the rest of the character. So the distance at which the camera renders images, I'm merely increased it so that it doesn't just draw what's closest to me, but draws also what's furthest away. So under view, select camera, and these other views, I'm going to go to camera attribute editor and make sure that everything is sorted out. Between 1 and 10,000, it draws the rest of the character, and this suffers the same thing. So a quick fix for that. 1 and then 10,000. So there we are. And we're ready to use Skyrigger. First thing I'm going to do, well, at this point it wouldn't be a bad idea to save your scene. This is going to be skater skyrigged _1. I'm going to come in now and make sure this character is the proper size, because we we made all those panes to have them aligned to the correct grid. Now let's put them on that grid. We do this by just popping the character up so it looks like they're kind of standing on the grid, and then we go in and realign the pivot point. I press because I'm on a PC, I press the insert key and it instantly goes into aligning the pivot point instead of the character. And I'm able to move that pivot point, and if I hold down the X key, that will snap on the grid very nicely. I'm inadvertently grabbing the rotation controls, which I don't want. And I can get past that by pressing the plus or minus sign on the keyboard. It raises the size of the controllers very quickly. So now the character is aligned so that they are standing exactly on the grid, and I can size them without them going through the floor again. And all I'm doing is I'm making sure that I size the character. First I talk to the game designers. How big is this character? Well, this is a 5-foot tall character. Great. So you go on the orthographic side here, and I'm just counting these very faint gray lines. I hope it shows up in the video until the character is 5 feet high. Then I come up here and I go down to modify, and I want to go to freeze transformations, go to the options for it, translate, rotate, scale, make sure that's all on, and you can freeze the transform or apply. Same thing, one keeps the window box up, the other one gets rid of it. Watch this over here when I do. When I press apply, the character, it kind of zeroes everything out, and scale stays 111. By the way, sorry, when you press freeze transform, the leftmost button, it will disappear. If you do the middle, it will actually stay up in case you want to use it again. So now we have a character that's ready finally to rig up, and I'm going to save the scene as, and then come in here, skater skyrigged _1. I simply change the number to 2. Very easy way to kind of continue with this. Okay, so let's get into Skyrigging. And the way you can evoke Skyrigger is to actually drag the Mel script into Maya, or if you've made a small button for it, as I have here in my custom shelf, you can just click on it and go right into rigging it up. So Skyrigger, I'm currently working on the version of 17. It's got some eye controls and jaw controls that I'm not going to be using because this is a fairly simple rig, but I do want to bring in the main character and have them from the orthographic front so I can gauge more or less where the joint positions are going to be on this character. And that's going to be crucial. So the first thing you do is, if you want eye controls because this is more of a cinematic character, or the eyes and where they look are important to the game, or if it's important to see the character talk, physically move their jaw, click these. If not, leave them off because it's just more controls you're not going to need. The first step is to create the boxes. You can see that down here it creates sort of a default sized character at about the absolute of 2.5 feet. If you want to scale this up, you can bring all the points up, but do be aware that you have an initial slider here right under where you can drag slowly to the left using your left mouse button, and it brings the whole of the rig up to sort of up in uniformly to try and match the character's. I go for shoulder height and kind of hip height because this is a semi-realistic character. You do have the more reasonable proportions as opposed to some cartoony characters, but try to get it up to at least the height where the top of the clavicle or the hips are located where you think it would be on your character, and then just leave it there. Second thing you need to do is actually come here and determine, by the way, you can also double click and round up or round down if you so desire. I don't want to round down because there's no sense to it right now, so I'll just keep it at 2.3. You can click on the amount of fingers that the character is going to need. By default there's always 1, and a thumb. I leave those out because in this particular case, if you look really closely at the character, they just do not have the detail in their fingers to warrant a lot of motion. I could put something in that character to make his fingers roll around, but in this particular case, it's kind of a moot point. But if I wanted to put fingers in, I would. How you put fingers in, by the way, is very much like we do in later tutorials, doing it all by hand. So we might just rig up. You can learn how to rig up fingers by watching that tutorial. So I do want to have a whirl joint. The whirl joint in this case is sort of keeping the character at 0, 0, 0, and they grow this sort of tail out from the top. I went over it briefly in how to animate the character that it's already been Skyrigged. You can check that out. So I'm going to create a world joint in this case, and what I want to do is, we really should be doing this more or less in the orthographic front view, because we're going to be lining up these boxes, which are placeholders for where the joints are going to be when you press create rig. This is going to be a two-step process. First of all, the mesh, as you can see, is coming at this arrow pose, not of a Vitruvian pose, which is kind of a T shape. The legs, as you can see from the top view, are actually slightly pointed outward, as is more of a realistic setup. And the elbows have a little bit of a bend in them as well. The knees might have the slightest bend, doesn't really look it, but all this stuff is going to be covered by Skyrigger as long as we understand how Skyrigger works. The first thing we're going to do is make sure that all these boxes line up with where the character's joints are. But there are some important caveats. First of all, the arms and the legs will have IK and FK switches made automatically for them. But to do that, these boxes must remain planar, in other words, level in one axis or another, for it to be constructed correctly. So for us to take this, we have to create the rig with the arms out, these boxes out, and we have to create the legs straight in this plane as well. How are we going to do that to accommodate arms that are bent in the mesh? Well, we do so by being very clear about the strengths and the limits of Skyrigger. The strengths are it does a lot of work for you, everything from IK-FK switches to all of the body constraints, including layers. What it does not do is it needs to have this particular line planar, which is the L arm all the way down to L wrist, and it needs to have the corresponding part in the hip, which is going to be L leg all the way down to L ankle straight as well. And I mean that by planar. So let's go into the side view and make sure that we can put all the boxes where they should be. The way that I'm going to do this is just kind of crawl up and down the body until I find the box I'm looking for. And I found it here with, go to the leg. If I go up one level in using the arrow key on my keyboard, I go to hip, and that's pretty much the one I need. So I'm going to push this back a bit. With low poly characters, with low resolution characters, you want to put, as I've said in other videos, you need to put the joint kind of in the middle of the meat of the character. Secondly, we're going to be grabbing more than one in this case. We're going to be grabbing the ankle. So you want to go in really close here on the ankle. By the way, Skyrigger can pop up just fine once you've accidentally gotten rid of it and you're not complete with your process of making the Skyrig. You can click it again and the window should come up and it'll be just fine. There you are. Pop. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab both these ankles, but if you simply click on something with a kind of a one-point click, you are only going to grab one thing in Maya. You have to do a selection square, and that ensures you select both of the ankle constraints, as you can see here. If I were to go in the this orthographic side view and simply click once, I would only grab one, and you can't tell from this view, so be very careful when you select things that you are selecting two if that's the ones you want to move. Now what I'm going to do with these ankles is I'm going to move them back a bit, ever so slightly, because I need to make sure that there is an indicated bend here in the boxes from the hip down to the knee, down to the ankles, so that there's already kind of a bend, slightest bend. I know I said keep it planar, but I'm going to, the one exception is that you've got to put a bend in this construction where the IK and FK is going to be, so that Maya knows how to construct the way that the joint bends. Remember, in Maya's mind, there's nothing wrong with a knee bending forward. You have to indicate, no, this is the way it's going to bend back when I move the constraint. You don't want it suddenly snapping to the other side. We're going to be doing the same thing also with the hand constraints to make sure that the arms are IK and FK as well. So I'm going to grab this toe controller and move it back. Again, I'm keeping things planar. I'm really not compromising the fact that they are out of the plane that they were drawn in, and that plane is this side view. And I'm going to put that ankle constraint right on the ground where the heel is. Well, actually, it's not properly. Yeah, I'm going to put that right on the ground because it makes an automatic IKFK foot tool. And I'm going to put the toe a little further back into the foot because then this geometry, there's enough geometry here to constitute a toe, so when the rotation here for the toe gets put in, we have enough geometry to go up and down. If I push this right to the tip of the shoe, then there would be no geometry out here for the toe controller to affect it. Okay, so I've pretty much made the controls as I want here for the knee, and then I'm going to come up here and just kind of sort things out slightly, one by one, going up the spine, just making sure it kind of follows this slight curve through the body. And then we get up here to the top where we have the, you don't want elbow, that would be a bit too early. Left, right shoulder. Okay, now we're up in the shoulder areas. You can, of course, select things here in the 3D view, then go into your outliner, click on the title so that Maya knows you're dealing in this window now, and then press F and you'll see what controller it has. So the frame hotkey is just the same for the outliner as it is for the modeling window, and in this case we want to come up here to, sometimes things are better grabbed from the front view or orthographic or perspective. Mid-chest, that's about right. Neck, okay, let's go back to this side view because I want to bring the neck where the neck begins. See this little tiny stump here of the mesh? I want to control that at the bottom. The next control is going to be head, and I'm going to bring that here. And you actually can put these anywhere. Again, the only things that we're concerned about being planar in this particular case are the sections of the body that are going to have IK, FK controllers. The spine, the neck, the head, they're always going to have FK controllers. And usually I put the head end up here on the top of the cranium because you then have the advantage of popping things like hats and whatnot if the character needs those for the game. By simply popping it to the top of this bone, it'll follow the head just fine. Okay, so that looks pretty good. Move Skyrig out of the way here. And let's start in with the shoulder, which, by the way, is more of a clavicle. We've actually put things shoulder, and then the next one down is left arm. Let me explain kind of the naming convention here. The naming convention is done because this is meant to be more of a clavicle, more of kind of the beginning of your collarbone, which is right below your neck. So I'm going to pop over to the orthographic front view, and I'm going to pull back so that I've got enough view, and I'm going to simply move this. This does not need to be planar, just the beginning of left arm down to wrist. So I have kind of the luxury of moving this to where the collarbone would be, and that would be a little more inside the body. That's this is the joint at which, when you shrug your shoulders, I don't know, that's actually your collarbone moving things, your collarbone in the front and the clavicle in the back. It is not raising your arm. So this shoulder control, I'm moving kind of to the middle of the meat of where the shoulder would be, and that's meant to raise the arm up and down. Going to put it between these two cuts here because it looks like you've got a nice V wedge to accommodate the arm going down, the arm coming up. All right, so now we get to the point where we need to gauge whether or not this is going to do the right job for this mesh. And how we do that is this little secret. Since we can only keep things planar, I'm only allowed to move them out or in like so. I'm not allowed to move them up or down because that would, of course, create kind of this stair step of these boxes, and we can't have that if you want this to do its job right. But we need to match these. So how do we get past doing this if that's wrong? Well, you come up here to this arm and you rotate it. And you rotate it, and then you can gauge from this distance where and how much you need to move these boxes down to accommodate the wrist or the elbow. You can do that, and then rotate. Z is -44. Just type in 0, it pops back. So if you need to adjust these a little bit more out or in, you can do so in this plane, keeping things flat, and then you can pop back to the left arm controller and type in -44 again, or 45, or whatever you had originally. So this looks pretty good to me. This is pretty much all I'm going to need. The elbow may not be in the perfect place, but the elbow is a hinge joint, so I don't mind it being kind of in that planar setup. So by default, Skyrigger already puts kind of this tiny bend between, as you can see here, the arm, the elbow, and the wrist. But in this case, this is not even inside the mesh according to the top view. You need to make sure things are fine. So, okay, that looks like it's going to hit all the major joints. Pretty good. Let me go to the orthographic front. Pretty good. I'm going to go back to 0. Again, after all my exploratory rotations are done, it is crucial that you return to this Vitruvian pose for your boxes for the creation of the rig. So I'm going to go to, I only need one finger, turn off the thumb fingers, I'll turn on the world joint. Actually, let's turn it off. And I'm going to type this character's name. You need a one-word name for the character as kind of the prefix. And I'm going to come in here and mirror next. Mirror means whatever I've done to this side of the arms and legs controllers, I now want mirrored to this side. So watch closely as I press that button, because you're going to see all of these boxes here, from the right shoulder to right arm, elbow, etc., match that of the left. In fact, I'll select all these, you can see it better. And that's because I have this specific button here that says mirror what's on this side to this side. This button does the opposite. We don't want that. So when I press mirror, there you go. Everything is aligned perfectly, and I can tell by grabbing this shoulder and typing in rotation Z, it'd be the opposite, not negative 44, but 44. Things still line up on that side of the body. Symmetry is important here. If your character is asymmetrical, you may have to do a little more noodling. The legs are also ready to go. The hips may be a little bit high because, you know, the higher the hips are, well, that's sort of the, you know, this is sort of the area where the legs meet as a mesh, so maybe not that high. So that'll work fine. I'll just leave those there. So at this point, I'm going to create the rig. And Skyrig is created. And everything should be matching perfectly. Give it a good perspective view. Yeah, it looks pretty, looks like it's hit all the central points. But here's the second half. I said the first half is you need to make sure that all the joints are in the proper locations. But we haven't created this rig to really match where the mesh is. That's okay. Here's the second part. The second part is where you take the each of these constraints, and remember the rotation values we used for the arm. It was negative 44, and you type them in so that things now match your mesh. You see, we've created the rig. We have yet to skin the rig, meaning we have yet to put the influence of these bones on the mesh, which gives us a chance to come in here and just type in values to accommodate the twist so that this will match the mesh perfectly before we skin it. Now in this case, we need to make sure that from the top view, the rotation of the foot is going to match, because remember that the feet were slightly turned out, like so. Slightly turned out, and also we are in fact allowed the chance to rotate these ever so slightly, because the concern of us keeping things planar is taken care of. We've already made the rig. So in this case, I'm going to round up 13, and I'm going to type in 3.5. There we are, just sort of rounding out, because I need to type in the opposite values on this side. So the values are rotate Y is 13, rotate Z is 3.5. In this case, we grab the controller for this side, and it's negative 13, and I believe 3.5 is still the rotation value. No, it's not. Negative 3.5 is the rotation we want on that side. So negative 13, negative 3.5, and 13, 3.5. And things should be lining up pretty nicely. And note that we already have all the FK controllers. Great. Okay, cool. We don't really have a lot of finger control concerns, but if we did, we would want these joints to actually be physically moved up into the body where we want them, because the controllers for the fingers are all FK. So we have the advantage of just curling all the fingers with one control. Move it here, and then you can move the next finger down a bit, and the next finger down here as well. There we are. So you get to mirror these joints onto the other side, mirror, and then create finger controls if you so desire. You don't need finger controls if you're going to delete these joints. That's fine as well. I'm not going to need finger controls for this character. If you did and you created 5 of them, you would simply rotate them into the positions you need according to where the hand mesh was, and then you would use the mirror tools and then create finger controls if you so desire. So let's now weight up the character, and it is done by going in here. As you can see, the prefix we gave this, which was dude, is on everything save for the mesh. There's no reason that Skyrigger needs to manipulate the mesh. So we're going to grab not the controls, not the skeleton FKs. Very important. Do not grab skeleton FK. You need to grab the skeleton, just the skeleton. And grab control, left click the mesh. And when you come up here to under rigging, you've got the skin option for bind skin. Here's some things you need to keep in mind before you bind. We come in here and we want to give it the maximum. Well, let me reset this so that I can mimic everyone else's possible setup. The first thing I want to do is I want to make sure that I've got joint hierarchy selected. Joint hierarchy means that if you have a joint selected, it's going to grab and distribute the influence on the control vertices of the mesh to every one of the children beneath that bone. Now when you don't use a world bone, the dude skeleton actually does not have, this top node is not a bone, the top node is a group. So you need to come down here to do joint root and grab that. That's the beginning of a joint root. You can see everything below it is a joint. So make sure that you've got joint hierarchy selected. Make sure that you've got the joint. Remember, we don't have a world bone, so actually his skeleton begins at the hip. And I'm going to press Control and then left click on the mesh. I don't need to allow multiple bind poses. I find them sort of distracting and unnecessary. But under normalized weights, it's crucial you put in not interactive, but put in post. Put that there. And also for maximum influences, this is up to you. However, for this particular exercise, I really don't have a lot of influences, meaning that weights will ultimately be shared, especially in the area where there's leg and his sort of pants, low slung cargo pants come down to almost the knees. You're going to have some areas in here with the mesh where the influence of that will be affected by one leg bone and the other leg bone. And this is also something you can see when we start rigging up the goblin. The goblin has kind of a tunic, and these things where there's going to be points that are shared between the legs as they move, especially up on the hip, is because some of these points are going to be influenced by movement of more than one bone. But you can delineate how many bones get any influence from what are the maximum amount of bones that get to influence these control vertices. In this case, just 2. We don't really have a lot going on. If you have a very complex character that the vertices are being shared on multiple joints to look realistic, you can have a lot of different influences. The problem with hiking this number up is you also have a lot of bones you don't want to affect things. So if you were to put in 3 or 5, you might find kind of some of the control vertices influenced by a bone out here in the finger or something here in the knee, and we don't need that. So we're really trimming it down to just 2 influences, i.e. 2 bones, and going to hit apply. So now the character is skinned, and you can tell how that's going to look by simply coming in and grabbing one of the FK controls and say raising the arm. And one of the great things about Skyrig setup, also if you go to the outliner, is you can see that all the controls are stacked in a hierarchical way. So while we have selected right now the control for the arm, we use the arrow key to go up, and it will simply crawl up the arm. So if you grab the hand control FK, not a joint, but a hand control FK, then you can crawl up the arm as well, and it grabs all the sort of succession of the parents, and this allows you to crawl up and down the body. You also don't need to show any of the joints if that's kind of in your way from understanding how the character is set up, because we're not grabbing joints anymore. We're only grabbing these controls, and the controls are now controlling the skeleton. We can give the FK-IK blend a test here where we just go from 0 to 1 and see how that moves. It moves pretty good. So this is the basic setup for rigging your character in Skyrigger and sort of the advantages that you have with using it. One of the last things you want to do is be aware that you have knee controllers, so don't lose focus on those. And if you really want to make this obvious, these control sets obvious, these controls obvious, then you might want to come in here and grab each section. This might be easier for me to do on the spine, but first I have to turn off the joints because those are, well, I suppose I can turn it off here in the layer, and make sure that the rest of things are referenced, like the mesh layer. Now I'm allowed to come in here and grab the control vertexes of just these controls, and I can scale them so that they now stick outside the body slightly. And I can do this for a succession of them and just kind of massage these so that when I'm animating and I have a hard shaded mode, these controls are now outside the body instead of hidden inside, like so. So that's just sort of a process of how do you want this to look, how accessible do you want these controls to be to the animator? Are they going to be using hard shaded a lot? Do you want separation between these enough that you can translate them up and down? All of that is up to you. The only thing that you need to be aware of and on top of is exactly what you're grabbing before you scale things up. Because if you grab a bunch of things like I did and just arbitrarily scale up, you may get rather messy results. So in this case, I see that I've missed 2 controls, so I'm just going to add those by holding down the Shift key. Now I'm scaling everything up. Cool. And the character is becoming a little more animator friendly, as it were. So this is kind of the area where you want to massage these as you see fit, so that the controls are accessible when you begin animating and not when you're rigging. You need to make things friendly for the animator. So let's grab this just as a test and turn and kind of see the head. Okay, we can see when he had some weighting problems because the lower half of that jaw is still controlled by the neck controller. And we don't want that. We want the skull to move as one piece. So this is the basic first part done of how to rig up your character. The second part is the weighting.